Welcome to episode 261 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 17th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. One of my goals in 2024 is to create a variety of opportunities to showcase the many voices and experiences of school librarians as much as possible on the podcast. This February, I am asking listeners to send in their voicemails of purchases I regret. And I'm really excited for March because our prompt is, what makes us amazing? I hope you will consider sending your voice message to my email, schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. Details are linked in the show notes. Amanda Jones's upcoming book, That Librarian, will be available starting on August 27th, but you can pre-order your copy now. And if you use the indie bookseller Cavalier House Books in Amanda's hometown of Denham Springs, Louisiana, you'll get a signed copy. I've included a link in the show notes. When you look at the cover of Amanda's book, there's a good possibility you'll recognize the Freedom Fighter shirt that she's wearing. She's reached out to the designer, Christy, who then designed a line of That Librarian apparel as well as That Librarian flair, such as a bag, sticker, and a mug. I love that we can all be that librarian who advocates for our library and our students' access to books. You will find a link to this online store in our show notes. 15% of the proceeds go to the Texas Library Association, as that is the home state of the designer. It may or may not surprise you that I can pinpoint the day and time I met Amanda Jones and the start of our friendship. I was attending my very first ISTE conference in 2019 in Philadelphia. I had made my way to the school library playground, the one session I made sure I wasn't going to miss. I found myself surrounded by school librarians from all over the country showcasing their programs and innovative lessons and practices. With my business cards in hand, I moved from table to table, meeting amazing school library leaders who, until that day, had just been posts on social media. Librarians like Christina Holzweiss, James Allen, Ashley Cooksey, Joyanne Boudreau, Robbie Barber, and yes, Amanda Jones. I might have spoken to each of them for just a few minutes, but that is enough when you are connecting with school librarians who you know will continue to be a part of your virtual PLN. If you have a chance to attend ISTE 24 this summer in Denver, consider submitting an application to present at this year's School Library Playground, no later than March 1st. It is my all-time favorite part of ISTE Annual Conference, and you will be connecting with library leaders who will become a part of your PLN and maybe even change your life. For details and to submit your proposal, see the link in today's show notes. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is @LMS_United. On Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Be sure to listen to episode 224. I announce a sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. And now a chance to hear from one of Literati's Book Fair veterans, Kathy. Kathy Edwards, welcome back to the podcast.
It's great to be back.
Give us a little idea, like your literati journey. Where did that start?
Goodness, my literati journey started in, I guess it would be spring of 2022. Yes, because last school year was 22-23. So spring of 22, they reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in trying literati, and I said, sure. And so I went ahead and scheduled book fairs out for fall of 2022 and February of 2023, and they were amazing. And by the time I was wrapping up my February book fair, we were already booking for fall of 23 and winter of 24. And I got off the phone in July for my pre-book fair phone call with my consultant, and we've already booked my fall of 24 and my winter of 25 book fairs. I'm already on their calendar and ready to go.
Wow. I mean, you have 4 more book fairs lined up, already on the calendar. And I'm guessing that you were very particular about the dates and the weeks that you got. Would you explain to listeners what motivated you and why you were so particular about making sure to get these dates on Literati's calendar?
My Literati Book Fairs have been such a success with students and parents, and even with my teachers. We've had adult books provided at these book fairs, and they have been loving it. And so we do a back to school night with parents in like August, September, and we do a science night in every February. So I go ahead and schedule book fairs for those 2 weeks so that we have a guaranteed evening shopping experience for our families. And those days they're long days, but they're fun, and they definitely bring in the money. You see lots of book joy. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and I've had evening events for book fairs, and that is something very fun about seeing the family coming in and going, okay, you can go pick out your books. And the parents really this is money that they can feel good about spending on their kids. Kathy Edwards, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back and share a little more of your literati expertise in the next coming episodes.
I'd be happy to.
Thanks so much, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Friends, be sure to tune in to learn all about Literati and their very generous offer. Librarians who book their very first Literati Book Fair and mention the code UNITED when booking may qualify to receive a $500 gift card to Titlewave. Visit the link in today's show notes and call the Literati team to see if you qualify. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. I'm also grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 6. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for today's episode, Book Club, the PD book, and my conversation with Madison Dearnaley. Madison Dearnaley, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Amy. It's so wonderful to be back here.
Well, friends, I'm having a wonderful reunion of sorts. Madison, you and I have been collaborating together since the beginning. I still remember realizing when somebody on the other side of the planet was listening to the podcast and saying out loud, oh my gosh.
It blows your mind sometimes, doesn't it?
Yes. I was like, I actually had to just sort of stop everything I was doing and tell my husband, I was like, you're not going to believe this, but somebody in Australia is following me on Twitter and they listen to the show. And again, I've said this before, but you were one of those very early adopters of the podcast. And I just needed that. Like, I was like, oh, somebody is listening.
Oh, we love it, Amy. You really are such a lifeline for us. And it is such a global podcast. It has, even recently I had someone reach out to me that they had a connection through Russia and Australia, and then you, and you're the one that brings us all together. So thank you for having that lifeline that connects us all the way around the world.
Well, and it's funny, you mentioned Russia because it was your second episode that they were talking about because they had heard you on an episode about circulation software, and you had chimed in about your circulation software, and somebody had listened to it in Russia. Is that right?
Absolutely. And then when they got in contact with that circulation software company, And they said, how on earth did you find us? And they said, oh, it was a podcast. And I went, oh, what podcast? And then, because I work with that company a little bit anyway, and I was doing a PD recently for them. And it's a small world sometimes, our big giant world.
Well, so friends, this is Madison's third appearance on the show. Her first appearance, Creating Culture Change with Dr. Kay O'Doney. And then the second one, you were one of 6 librarians who shared your expertise on circulation software. I am so glad that we have this opportunity to chat. For listeners who have not heard you on your earlier appearances, please introduce yourself and tell us about your library and the grades you serve and a little bit about the programming you do.
Okay. So I am the head of library services at St Paul's School, which is in Queensland, which is in Australia. So we're on the east coast of Australia. It is a pre-prep to year 12 school. So that is, we have 3-year-olds all the way through to 18-year-olds, all in the one campus. And we do that a lot in Australia. I don't think you do that a lot so much in America, but that's quite common for us over here. It is an independent Anglican school. So that means we get to be self-governed a little bit, which is nice. I have 2 libraries in the school. So we have the junior school library and the secondary school library. The secondary school library is in our innovation precinct. So that's our new building. I think, Amy, the last time you and I were talking, we were actually still waiting to get into that innovation precinct. We did it, we're in, and that's a beautiful building that houses the secondary library and a beautiful big makerspace area and digital technology classrooms and food technology classrooms and the library, obviously. So part of my role is overseeing both the junior library, secondary library, and the innovation precinct. I don't do it alone. I have an incredible team. I am so very, very fortunate to have my team. I have a team that run the junior library and then a team up in the secondary library, as well as a team that we're all one team, but help out with the innovation precinct and the possibility hub, which is what we call our makerspace. And I've been fortunate to be able to even extend that team for this year because it's so very busy in our spaces, which is amazing. But I am based up in the secondary library and the innovation precinct myself. And so I teach the year 7 to 12 students. I am their teacher librarian. So I get to run English sessions, library sessions for the English classes. I have a few timetabled classes that are outside of the library, so other subjects, one of which is a design-led venture this year. So I'm loving that. That's very cool. And then I have a flexible timetable within the library. And so that means I can take regular fortnightly lessons for our year 7 classes, a couple of times a term for our older English classes, and then on demand for all the other classes for history and science and, information literacy, digital literacy, how to use Canva, how to use our podcasting equipment, working a lot with staff. It's a lot. I absolutely love it.
You and I decided to both read a book together. And I think that it was complete, sort of happy coincidence that we sort of looked at a book and were like, actually, I would like to read that. And you said you would like to read that too.
You posted it on Twitter, and as soon as I saw the title, I went, I have to read that. That's a book for me.
The book is called The PD Book, 7 Habits That Transform Professional Development, and it's by authors Elena Aguilar and Lori Cohen. I was so grateful because when I read it, knowing that you and I were going to have this conversation, all of a sudden gave this book a whole new meaning for me. So, Madison, what is the expectation of you when it comes to leading professional development for your teachers, for other teacher librarians, and I would even go so far as to say, presenting at conferences, your leading of training of others, be it for school teachers, for teacher librarians, and the like. What is that like for you?
Well, I love PD. I think I call myself a bit addicted to professional development, and I have been for a while, and maybe that's just the love of learning and really loving that world of school libraries. So there's a few different areas. So obviously, I do that within my school. So that is something that we as teacher librarians, as the school library staff, the school library team, working alongside other teachers to run professional development is, I stumble over the word expected because I'm not sure if it's expected or just something where we've gone and it's a great fit. No one's turning up and saying, right, where have you done that? When's it happening? But it's something that we do a lot of. I've actually put it in as a library team. A couple of years ago, we went through and did our whole strategic plan overhaul, and it's one of our 4 key parts. So we have 4 key parts of our strategic plan, and professional development is one of them because it was something we identified as something that people really valued through the school library and something that we did a lot of and had that real skill in bringing to our school community. So in terms of within the school, a lot of that is on the fly. It's working with teachers when they come in and ask for something. It's the teacher sitting in with that class when we're running a session on how to create that multimedia presentation, and the teacher sitting there and going, I'm learning as I go. It is in meetings. So just on Wednesday, I was doing a presentation to our curriculum leaders team, which I am a part of, but doing a session. So the head of that, the curriculum leader director, says who wants to, have a session, and I say, yes, please, absolutely. And then I put it out to all of them. Can I please come to your subject areas to run a similar session or a targeted session? Helping with our professional learning community. So we're running one on the next Wednesday. So I'm helping a little bit with that. But a lot of it is that working alongside teachers all the time and also putting out videos or how-tos or email updates, newsletters, really sharing that wherever we can and however we can. And then the other side is what I do, I guess, is still in the school library sphere, but outside of work. And so I have a website that I share curation of professional learning. I create a little list every month, which really came out of me having so much PD. I was kind of like drowning in how much, and then would see something on Twitter and go, I'd really love to do that, and then totally forgot about it. So curating a list and sending that out as a newsletter and as a post every month. Also doing a lot of webinars and speaking at conferences. Being on this podcast, I see that as professional development, both for myself, because you do dig deeper into a topic, but also for others. So leading professional development for school librarians.
I love that you also mentioned the value of sharing out what you do, the kind of teaching that you do, that it also includes your blog, your newsletter. Can I ask, would it be okay if we share that information with listeners in the show notes so they could also benefit from the things that you share out?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think something that I realized, and we were talking about this before we started to record, was, one of the reasons I found becoming a librarian so appealing was the expectation that I would be also working with the teachers. And that sort of does set you apart from being a classroom teacher. Most classroom teachers don't have the expectation that they would also be responsible for training their peers. And I love working with teachers.
Yes, so do I. And it's funny because a lot of teachers actually get very stressed about presenting in front of other teachers or teaching in front of other teachers, whereas that's just something in the library we're so used to being on show or working alongside each other. So I think, yes, working with my peers and the staff at the school is one of the things that I love the most, and certainly working with other school librarians from around the world, that's what I also really cherish.
Absolutely. Before we get started and dive into today's look into the PD book, I'm curious to know a little bit about your experiences with professional development as a participant, not leading the PD. Can you share with us a PD experience which failed to have its desired effect, and describe a time when you really feel you benefited from a PD experience?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have all sat through those compliance PDs where you're having to do your first aid training or you're fire training or workplace health and safety training or whatever it is. And I know that there have been lots of those where it's been a little bit too long or someone likes talking too much, which is always good for me to reflect because I like talking too much. So I need to remember to not be that person. But in terms of a PD experience where I think the school really tried to set it up as a good experience and where it just didn't work for me was at one of my previous schools where I was getting these things like, can you write a goal and it's got to be due by this date and send that back? And they put us in professional learning communities and I didn't know anyone and there was no scaffolding around that I felt, and it didn't feel authentic. It was just like we were ticking a box and it really just didn't, I felt lost. And I'm a goal setter. I'm someone who loves PD or would love that situation. And I was going, I'm sorry, I just don't know what you want me to focus on. I don't know what this is meant to solve. Compared to benefiting from a PD opportunity, I mean, there are so many. I mean, listening to your podcast every week, Amy, on my trip home to, we're on my commute, and then having to listen to it again so I can actually write down all of my things, because doing it while driving's not great because then I need to write it down because I've forgotten everything. Going to webinars and conferences. I love actually just connecting with other librarians. Those casual conversations in the hallways at conferences often brings such great results. But my absolute favorite is having a mentor. And I have had so many incredible mentors in my career. I've been so fortunate. From my very first school library, who my head of library really took me under her wing and went, I'm going to train you up so that one day you'll be a head of library, and went out of her way to do it. I mean, Amy, you've had a front row seat to one of my formal mentoring arrangements that I've had with Kay, and the benefit of that was done through ALIA. So that's our version of ALA, Australian Library and Information Association here in Australia, and they formalised that. So we had an agreement. They paired me up with Kay, which was incredible. But I've also had and continue to have one of the most incredible professional relationships with a mentor at my current school. And so when I joined my current school, it was funny because it really mirrors in so many ways what they were trying to achieve at my past school. And yet it was done so well. I was setting goals, but I had a coach who worked with me through that. And we were documenting our learning. We were going through and making it really targeted. The outcome of what we were meant to be achieving was really clear. But it's that professional relationship that I had with, and still have, with that mentor, that coach, who I'm very excited I have been able to join into the library team this year. And I get to sit next to him now. He shares my office space. And so to be able to just have those professional conversations every day, to challenge each other, to look for professional learning opportunities outside of that relationship and share them and bounce ideas backwards and forwards, there is just nothing on earth like working with someone who is so like-minded and yet challenges you professionally. I am incredibly grateful. Absolutely. I mean, I leave work just on cloud 9 every single day. I mean, maybe other, people in schools, maybe teachers have that because they have 3, year 3 teachers and they all get to work together in one of them. But often in the school library, it's just us. And I am incredibly lucky to have a team, and I love bouncing ideas around with my library tech, and I love being able to work together and with so many different people. But having that incredible mentor relationship is just my absolute favourite.
Oh my gosh, I am so glad we had this opportunity to talk. I gotta tell you, so yes, I totally agree. For me, selfishly, the podcast is my dose of connecting with professionals. If I want to be in a room with another school librarian, I have to, first of all, leave my school district, leave my building, leave my school district, and drive about 15 or 20 miles away to a county meeting where in the room of 15 to 20 people, 3 of us are librarians. Or get on a plane. I can go to a conference to visit a conference, and that's wonderful. But I would go 4 to 6 months without being in a room with another school librarian. So no, this is very selfish. I will say I have been very fortunate that when it comes to compliance training, that kind of learning, a lot of my two recent districts have resorted to videos and sort of these automated trainings where you watch a series of videos, answer 4 questions, a series of videos, answer 4 questions. And so thankfully that has been removed. I think I would have to say when I have felt a PD absolutely fail was any time, and this has happened multiple times, when our school district comes together. So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of teachers in one auditorium, and they've brought for us some academic who is not a member of the faculty, not a member of the staff, a perfect stranger, but usually somebody who has a PhD. No offense to anybody who has a PhD, but this is a perfect stranger. They're going to stand on stage, and for the first 47 minutes of the school year, when all of us would really just like to be in our schools, we'd like to be in our rooms, we'd like to be in our spaces getting ready for the school year. We're so excited to see our friends, and we have to spend the next 47 minutes listening to this perfect stranger try to motivate us, and this is going to be the year for change, and to expect one person on stage to meet the professional development needs of the hundreds, 300, 400, 500 people sitting in an auditorium and all benefit from it is wrong. And I can't you're never going to convince me that this is a good use of anybody's time. And then probably the best professional development for me is hands down going to a conference and being surrounded by other school librarians. It is when I can breathe. It is when I truly feel that I am surrounded by friends. And in many cases, we've never met. That's like, it doesn't matter. I just happen to know I'm surrounded by like-minded people. And there is this sense of calm and that you are overwhelmed with, and realization that for the next several days, you can just sort of soak in all of this support and positivity. And so, no, truly, a school librarian conference is hands down the best. And I think that needs to be stated, especially for those of us who don't work in districts with other librarians. We need to make that compelling argument to be able to go to a conference. Because, like you said, our grade level teachers, all they have to do is step outside their door. They can step outside their door, look left, look right. You've got people who can support you, who've taught that class, taught that grade, taught that subject, but not us. I feel like many of us can relate to the explanation provided in the introduction of the difference between transactional professional development and transformative professional development, and what PD is and what PD isn't. And could you give us a summary, and why is this such an important distinction to make?
Well, they kind of outline transactional as something that has really passive subjects. So, your example of the 500 teachers in an auditorium are all sitting there going, I really don't want to be here right now, with something where you have an expert on stage. So exactly your example. There you go. Wonder why it didn't feel so great. Where you are meant to be just sitting there and acquiring knowledge. They're just going to fill that empty head of ours, and off we go, all inspired. And the other thing is that they identify transactional as having that compliant behavior. So I guess whether that's compliant with us actually sitting there in the auditorium and listening, or if it's us then going, okay, that's the way we're rolling out whatever the new learning is that you would like us, or the new approach, or whatever it is. And that there's often this reward based, that it's external rewards rather than something that we're there to love and listen to. In comparison, they identify transformative professional development as something that really taps into a person's behavior and behavior choices, their beliefs, and their way of being. And for me, I think beliefs is so key there, because it's all about what we're thinking about this professional development. And maybe that's why professional development, where we're going to a conference or we're listening to a podcast that we've selected to put on, or we've signed up for that webinar, that's so useful to us, because we already believe that we should be doing it, because we've already chosen to be there. And we're coming to it with an approach to learn and take away those key things. It's not something that's forced on us. I think some of those things that, you look at the transactional, that expert on stage, acquiring knowledge, I look at that as a definition and compare it to things like going to a conference where the format is that expert on stage, for example, or at least a peer who is an expert in that area on stage, and that we're sitting there, yes, to acquire knowledge, but the difference then perhaps is our beliefs about it and our behaviour towards that, and how that's going to change the way that we're actually enacting something, that we're choosing to change how we then, they describe it as a way of being.
Context is everything, right? What really matters is our mindset going into this experience that we're going to have. I'm thinking about when everything has been orchestrated and it's done so to impact the largest number of people possible. It's very hard for a participant like us to walk into a situation for which we had no agency, no choice, and quite honestly, that agenda was created and not truly developed with us in mind. And so I can't agree more. It is truly, I think that you have to realize that when a bunch of adults are being subjected to somebody else's plan for how we should best use our time, and I'm going to tell you right now, and I've seen this done, I've seen the adults in that room resort to behaviors that I would see with my students at an assembly. And it's sort of like, what are you really going to be doing for the next 47 minutes? And while we might not be as guilty about scrolling on social, you better believe the list making and all of the to-do items that people are worried and thinking about doing. And there's something else happening in front of them while the speaker is going. It's indicative that this type of presentation probably is not the best use of anybody's time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it's that context and what people are thinking about and wanting to, engage with, what's valuable to them.
I think it's important to mention that the examples of professional development in this book also include examples of PD varying from a half-day program to multiple full-day programs. My opportunities to provide PD sometimes is like 15 minutes of the staff meeting, or perhaps, like I said, I've been able to teach during one of these election days where the children aren't in school, but we have our professional development for our staff. I think we have to be reasonable with the expectations that we have of ourselves when the amount of time that is allocated for us to provide professional development is going to always be determined by our administrators and those who are overseeing the larger day.
Absolutely. And I think it's also valuing those times. It doesn't have to be a 45-minute thing in a theatre to be valuable. Those 15 minutes that you get to connect with staff at a meeting are probably way more valuable than any long presentation's ever going to be. So yes, it's seeing and recognizing those little opportunities that we've got, those hallway conversations, those emails that we send out that are targeted and have helpful information. Yeah, those times are fabulous opportunities for sharing professional development with our staff.
I'm looking on page 32. What caught your eye?
Well, I really like the process that these authors have suggested where we come up with how we construct PD. So what does PD look like? And they go through a series of steps that says you have to identify your outcome. You have to look for the gaps where, what are you trying to fill? What are you trying to, meet? Brainstorm, actually sit down and come up with all of the different ideas that might be helpful and useful in that session, and then prioritize, which I think is great to pare it back. And that's something I should probably do a little bit more. I tend to overdo things. But I guess it's really knowing your audience and knowing that outcome and making that clear. It's exactly what we do with our students. So going, this is what I want you to understand. And if hopefully at the end of it, that's what you're walking out with, it's increasing that value. And I guess a question that I had for you, Amy, is how you perhaps go through this process or use that when you decide on podcast topics, because you do seem to magically deliver to us exactly what we need at the right time. So well done and thank you. But how do you go through that process in terms of the podcast topics or, topics for in your school environment?
I agree with you. I see a lot of parallels between designing a lesson that we would teach our students and designing professional development that we do for our peers. I am acutely aware that when we teach our peers, when we teach our adults, the expectation is a little different because there's a certain level of trust that what we are imparting on them is information that will absolutely transform what they do in terms of their workflow, in terms of how they do their jobs. And I think that in some respects, I think of that also with the podcast. I have been fairly forthcoming that, number one, the podcast topics oftentimes land in my lap because there is some amazing school librarian who does something and then says, hey, would this be something that we could share with your listeners on the show? It's something that I do that I love, and I think other people would benefit from it. And so that is just a gift that when, I can't hide my joy when I see those messages that come across my social media and my emails. And yet also the topics for the podcast have also been very organic during the pandemic. During the pandemic, there were some topics which obviously came up because none of us had ever taught during a pandemic. And so there was a necessity that also compels the topics that we do. Selfishly, a good example, I pick a topic that I know nothing about, or I realize I should know something about, and I don't. Universal design for learning, there's an example. Another one is restorative justice, so restorative practices. My long answer to your question is when it comes to deciding what we're going to do on the show, what I think our listeners would find beneficial ultimately drives the content. As teachers, we knew the importance of creating the conditions for learning. And it's no less important when we lead professional development. And, these conditions for learning are really vital because, as we've said in the beginning, if we walk into a situation where we're not feeling that our needs are going to be met or we're distracted, like many of the teachers are at the beginning of the school year. So, what do you think when it comes to focusing on the importance of the conditions for learning?
I'm going to read them out if I can, because I think they're important and they're a big key part of what this book shares. So the first one is, and I guess I'll summarize instead of fully reading them out, that's the learners understand the purpose for the learning that they're involved in and understanding why they're sitting there, if it is an enforced PD, if it's something that they are joining in with, what's the benefits? What are they going to get out of it? Why is it relevant to them? The second one, and I think this one is the one that I really hone in on, the key one for me. It's the social, emotional, cognitive, and physical needs of learners are met. And we know that with our students, but that is something I think we forget about with teachers, and yet it is even in staff. It's even more key because it's understanding the people in the room with you. Where are they at? Because they might be having to head off and get their classroom set up so that they can welcome those students back. It might be that they've, who knows what's going on in their world, that where are their needs? And it's more than just putting out a plate of food when we're running this PD. It's actually recognizing the needs and where our fellow learners are when they join us in that room. It's about designing it really carefully and thoughtfully and constructing it with those learner needs in mind and the goals. It's that every last detail of the learning experience is anticipated and planned. And oh my gosh, I am someone who just runs on the fly a lot of the time. And most of the time I pull it off. But when I am actually organized and have planned it all through, you can see the difference. You can see the benefit that makes. And it is things like making sure that you've got enough chairs for everyone so that when they walk in, they feel welcomed and there is somewhere to sit. And that in the middle of pulling everything together, particularly for professional development at the beginning of the year, and we had a perfect example of this year for us, because we have days, they're not due to election, but we have days where the staff come back early, and we have professional development days when the students are not on campus. But it's thinking about designing that environment so that it engages everyone. It's facilitators skillfully executing that learning plan and adapting to where the learners are throughout the session. And the authors also identify that the facilitators themselves are reflective, that they themselves are learners and they have that high degree of emotional intelligence and self-awareness and can motivate people. So they need to be people that are able to connect with people and, read the room, I guess, is something that I say a lot. Read the room and understand who are you joining with.
Okay.
Is that what you've written down?
So, friends, we could not have planned this better. So, it's simpatico. I swear, I am going to take a picture and prove to Madison that I am writing things. So, I'm writing as Madison's talking, and all the things I'm writing down are the things I'm going to say when Madison finishes. And there's just a little bit of a 3-second delay because, again, we're halfway around the world from one another, and I write, read the room. And it's like, no, you have to be able to read the room. And I think that's so vitally important. And having been in a space where the leader of the training was, I'm going to use the word barreling through. They were just plowing through this information because we have to get through this information. And it's like, okay, you're going to lose most of us in this process because your priorities are not our priorities. And I will say, I wholly agree with Madison's, the read of what is so vitally important here. I also want to say when I do my training, and especially when I do conferences and when I present, especially to school librarians, I will post outside of my door the QR to the session so that and especially, what I've noticed a lot of times, especially in conferences, that if you happen to have a session that's going at the same time that somebody else's session's going and people want to be at both, they may only be at part of your session. So I'm going to make sure, because I want to relieve people of that stress. Oh, I wasn't there at the beginning. I didn't get the link to the notes. I know teacher librarians, we're so hyper fixated on resources and the resources that you and I will take back and then in our own time sort of come to appreciate and dive and do that deep dive afterwards. And so even it doesn't, my feelings aren't hurt if you're not coming to my session, but I'm going to put the resources out by the door next to my session description, and it's going to have the QR. It's going to have a little bit.ly so that even if you can only come to part of the session, you're not worried that somehow I'm not going to share it with you because I'm just going to give it to you all right now. I feel very strongly about that. I love when we recognize that we are learning from the attendees in our sessions. This does go both ways. If we are doing our jobs in leading professional development, we have to also be open to the idea that this is also going to be a learning experience for the person who's leading the session. This happens every time if it involves technology, especially because I've gone to technology conferences And we all know that there's more than one way to do something, and you can't possibly know everything about a particular feature or tool or way to utilize it. So I am always going to be open and receptive to this idea that I'm going to learn from the people who are participating in the space where I happen to be leading a training.
And I think that's something that's so key to what our role is. We work with teachers every single day. We work alongside them. That's something that's certainly part of my role, that I team teach. I very rarely have a class on my own. When I'm going into a classroom to do a referencing lesson or a research lesson or how to write a report or an English session on, reading for pleasure, I have a teacher there, the classroom teacher, and they're the expert in their subject area. And I'm the teacher librarian who can bring the other bits, and we work together. So it's always learning, and it's just setting up the right environment so that people can feel comfortable to share, that they may not recognize that, yes, actually their skill in that particular area of using that tech in that way is something that's so very powerful for someone sitting next to them, that it might be normal for them, but that's something if they can share. So yes, reflecting and being a learner and joining with that group that we're working with is very important.
Madison, Chapter 3 is all about navigating power in a professional development dynamic. And it reminds me of the episode that we recorded with Dr. Kay O'Doney, Creating Culture Change. And friends, I've included links in the show notes to Madison's earlier episodes. I love the conversation we had with Kay. When considering the sources of social power, teacher librarians, I feel, can tap especially 3 sources of power: our expertise-based power, our relational power, and our informational power. And that also came up when we were talking with Dr. Kay O'Doney.
Absolutely. And that was something that Kay and I spoke about and worked on in terms of what is the influence that I have in my space when I want to create culture change, which was around building a reading culture. And we're still working on that because culture change takes a long time. And when I was presenting on Wednesday with my team, the curriculum leaders team, that was my first section. Here is what we've done so far, and here's where we're hoping to go next. But those 3 areas are, as you said, exactly where school library staff just work all the time. We are the experts in that area, and often, as you said, there is no one else in your school building, school district. So drawing upon that and sharing that, and also recognizing when you may not think you're an expert in that, but of that one little how to use that tech thing or that software piece or that process to make life easier, you can tap into that expertise. And that is where we're sharing all the time. Relational power is a big one for me. That's another one that the authors identify as sources of power. And I think building relationships is something that, that's how I operate in terms of the library. It's always about building those relationships with other school librarians, and that has power, because when you are that person who stepped up for someone in the past or helped out when there's an issue, that level of trust and that level of being able to come back and ask for help, that then has a lot of power when people are needing to learn something, so that when you are standing up for that 15 minutes before your staff meeting, they go, yes, I'm going to tune in and listen to this because that's someone that I can trust and relate to.
I think it's so vitally important when we're talking about those relationships that we're building. A lot of that may seem non-related. If you're just building those connections with your colleagues, what you're doing is laying the foundation of trust so that when it comes to creating an opportunity to teach, you've established yourself as somebody they have come to be vulnerable with, they can share with, and they feel safe with. I feel like I know I'm doing my job. When my staff ask me questions, they would never ask other people. And I feel like sometimes it has to do with the fact that most of my colleagues are so young. and they know I'm not. And I've also been around for a long time, but they don't feel like I'm going to, and you have to be so careful when you are doing some of this informal training with your teachers to make sure that you always make sure they feel safe in asking you questions, and they never for 1 minute regret asking you and revealing their vulnerabilities, and you want to make sure that they feel supported that way. So I think it's absolutely vital, and we do it well. But when you do step back and realize that they wouldn't ask these questions of any other random person in the building, we are the go-to person for many of those questions because there isn't anybody else who would fit that sort of, we're a catch-all. We are the junk drawer of knowledge.
Love that. The junk drawer of knowledge. That's our new hashtag, I think.
They have junk drawers in Australia,
absolutely.
Right?
Oh, yes.
You have junk drawers. You have like all of it.
Everything. And that's what I say when I'm inducting new staff. I say, you can ask me anything. If you are wandering around this school going, where is the bathroom? Come and ask me, because if you know where the library is, and yes, I can help you get textbooks or resources or lessons or whatever, but if it's just to go, I am lost, come and ask me. And if we can set ourselves up as that person, then they're going to come back to the library time and time again. But you also pointed out informational power. So
absolutely.
Talk to me about that one, Amy.
Well, I think informational power is where we really do, we are the experts. And not because we are inherently experts, but we have made it our business to learn things on behalf of others. And so it makes a great deal of sense to come to us because we will take on that need. If teachers need to know something, sometimes I'm 15 minutes ahead of them. I will intentionally learn something, not because it satisfies a need of my own, but I'm learning it on behalf of the teachers I'm going to teach this to in a week or so. And I feel like that altruism as an educational leader is what sets us apart from the other teachers, because they are supporting their subject matter, their grade level, and our purview is everybody. And that is that argument I try to make every year when it comes to going to an educational technology conference, that I'm going to go as part of that educating myself is to satisfy that informational power that we then are able to bestow and impart on the teachers in our school community.
Absolutely. And it's also recognizing their lack of time. So if we can step into the gap for them, and I had a curriculum leader come to me the other day as a follow-up to the call out that I made at the presentation I did on Wednesday. And they said, okay, I really liked this section, and I hardly mentioned it in the section, but that was important to them. And they said, oh, could you just, do some work on that for me so I can go and do that legwork, and that's beneficial to other areas and for my own learning. So it's filling that gap when it's needed.
Well, and friends, I think we can all remember with an alarming amount of clarity just how much we had to provide in the way of support for our staff in this, I'm going to say in April, May, June of 2020. And I remember talking to more than a few librarians who said, it is our time to shine because we do learn things on behalf of others. And we are going to be those supports. And again, seizing on those opportunities to support our staff, our building, our colleagues, not because it's our priority, but because it's somebody else's priority. And I think that that's something that doesn't go away now that we are in 2024. Let's talk about power struggles. And, this is something that I'm trying to sort of sense when I might have felt, and I almost feel like this is when we feel resistance in the room, if you know what I'm saying. The power struggles were addressed in this book, and the power struggles, according to the authors, focus around the topic that's being discussed, the time and the timing that this takes place, the team in terms of the people around us, and the expected tasks. What are we expected to do when we are at these trainings? And I think we have to be cognizant of that.
Absolutely. It's almost like that once you get told you have to do it, they don't want to do it anymore, or we don't want to do it. I know if I get told to, you have to read this book, suddenly I don't want to read it anymore. But it's recognizing that. And I think when we go back to those criteria for success in professional development that the authors listed, and understanding the needs in the room and the purpose and the clear setting up of this session, that when you look at the power struggle and the things that they've identified that you just read out, the topic, time, teammates, and tasks, it's how do you look at that and prepare for all of those through those success criteria. So if you think about the timing, when is the best time for this? And that's why I'm always curious why they put it on at the beginning of the year when they just want to get their lives started in the classroom. And then you look at the timing. How much time does this really need? Could you send it out in, earlier in videos or links later, or, here's the info, here's your hook, now come back to me later, or, just recognizing that, thinking really clearly about the teammates and who you're partnered with. And that's what the authors say here. Participants object to who they are partnered with or are asked to work with, who is present or not present. And I had the perfect example this year. They had set us up and they said to everyone, okay, now you have to go and work in teams of people that you're not usually working with. And I heard later that people said, oh, I didn't know who to go to. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know who to sit down with. And that immediately gets people on this nervous energy kind of movement, because people are used to the groups that they work within. They're comfortable. And as the authors actually give some case studies at the beginning of this book where it went really well or went really wrong. And one of their went really well examples is where they say that the participants at the end said, how did you know I would just fall in love with working with this group of people over these days? How did you pair us up? And the author says, well, we made the conditions right. We didn't, but we did actually spend time thinking about who we're going to pair you up with and planning that. And that comes back to this success criteria that we talked about before, actually planning every single detail of this, including who you're going to be paired up with. And can we facilitate that in some way instead of just go and find someone you don't usually work with and they look around all nervous and then they'll huddle in their usual groups anyway because that's scary. And it's, I completely understand that anxiety. But yeah, it's looking at how we can address these power differences through the deliberate planning of professional development, I think. Is that your take as well, Amy?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there is some benefit to getting us out of those comfortable habits. I'm guilty of saying, save me a seat. What are we? I mean, we sound as bad as the kids. Save me a seat. Hey, when you get to the meeting, save me a seat. And, God forbid we sit next to somebody we don't normally sit next to. And I will say, I know my administrators have read this book. I know this book was part of their sort of educational leadership training, because I have been in a situation where we are on teams and you look at them and it's like there was a randomizer, and yet it wasn't, because they have intentionally broken up all of the grade levels, and they have intentionally, deliberately broken up the subjects. And so that there's like, in the high school, we will have one math teacher in the group. There will be one social studies teacher. There will be one English teacher. There will be one phys ed, or, maybe it's the art teacher or the music teacher. And it's scrambled, but it's not, because and it's fair. I want to say this. When we looked around the room, it was as jumbled up as our group was. And now everybody could relax because everybody was in a group that was as discombobulated as it could possibly be. My favorite chapter is 4, Anchor in Adult Learning, because I'd never heard of the term adult learning before this book. And especially this focus on what not to do when delivering professional development.
Yes, the list is an interesting list. And some of it you'd think hopefully people would understand anyway. But yet you can read through the list and say, yes, being in a PD where I was treated like a child or made to do meaningless things. And you can see the eye rolls from the staff as they go through. Absolutely. Or being embarrassed. We try not to do that with our students either. And yet why that's okay for adults, I think, telling them that they're going to do one thing and then giving them something else to do, telling them things that they can't do, really throwing them into a group with strangers and then not even giving them a chance to share their names and recognizing the emotions in the room. And again, I think we go back to our read the room, people. This is important when you're going through that. Or making them feel like they're in jail and have no choice about what they're going to say or do for 3 days. That one's an interesting one. I've thankfully not been in that situation.
Well, and on some level, yes, this seems intuitive. This seems obvious. And yet, I could also see where some of these have perhaps not intentionally happened, but that was the end result. Agency is always huge. Something I've learned very quickly when working with the high school students is if the students have had an opportunity to choose what they learn about when it comes to their research, all of a sudden you have a far more willing participant. Adults are no different. Adults are no different if you give us some agency. And if I could just for a minute selfishly promote the podcast, there are districts which have approached me, and the answer is always yes. Could we use the podcast for professional development over the summer? Of course, friends, it's free. So these districts would give their school librarians, say, the option to select 5 to 7 episodes, listen to them, and then fill out a Google form as to how you will implement these changes or these resources in your own space to reach the goals you have for your space. And there's that agency piece, because you get to choose what you learn about because it's relevant to your own needs. And again, that's always been something that I strive for, is to provide that kind of, array of learning opportunities for people tuning in.
Absolutely. And what a great opportunity for those staff to have been given to use that as PD, because so often, we tune in our own time, but to actually have a district structure that in and recognize that their learning needs to be unique from what other teachers in the building are learning. And I love that the reflection piece, that it's not just listen and move on. It's what are you going to do with this? What do you take away from it? And what do you start acting on? Where is the benefits coming from that you can, see in the school, which is fabulous.
I absolutely love this statement. And they even put it in bold. You can't make people learn. No, you can't make people learn. And, I think that it is so vitally important for any of us going into a situation where we're going to be providing professional development for adults and colleagues and fellow teacher librarians. It is vitally important that we recognize at the end of the day, there has to be that willingness on the part of the participants, on the part of the people who are going to be included in our trainings that we provide, that we have to give them a reason to want to be there. And for me, what has been most compelling is making sure that whenever I offer training, that the people participating understand that this is going to support the things you do with your class every day, work smarter, not harder.
Absolutely. Giving them that choice, making it really purposeful to them, and recognizing, and I think that's another insight that we as school library staff have. We know what they're, teaching in classes. Perhaps we've worked with them before. We know where gaps might be that we can identify, so that when we're sending those little emails out, or we're standing up in at the beginning of staff meetings, or sharing things in collaborative groups, then we can target it towards what's coming up. As you said before, 15 minutes ahead of everyone. And that can be really powerful because it is purposeful. It is going to be authentic and something that they can use.
Adults are awfully good, and so are students, at seeing inauthenticity, at sensing that you aren't being completely transparent with them about whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. I think, and they know when we're excited about a topic that we're sharing or not, I think, and that's what I try and pick up on. If I'm sharing, that I'm only going to share stuff that I think is genuinely useful for them, or stuff that I'm actually excited to share with them, so that they can pick up on that. I'm, as engaged in this professional learning as they are.
I'm going to tell you right now, I got so excited. Did you catch on page 125 this idea of coaching up? In a sense that we, as leaders of professional development, have an opportunity to educate those who supervise us. It's fantastic. And if you can do this without offending your administrators, that's great. But what is absolutely key is having the ability to lead professional development without making your participants, especially your administrators, feel somehow stupid or less than.
And I love the way that they put this in there and their ideas for that. It's leading questions and asking reflective questions in conversations. It's something that I'm very aware of. I'm younger than a lot of the people that I work with. I'm new to the teaching world in many respects. So for me, a lot of what I do is coaching up. And I guess that's not necessarily in terms of supervising, but me recognizing experience and knowledge and understanding, and so that when I'm out there sharing, it's very much coming from this perspective of I'm learning too, and doing that in a way that is not, oh, I'm suddenly the expert and I'm going to tell you everything. It's just, oh, I've got this really cool idea, let me share, but I would equally love to hear your cool ideas. So it was very interesting to read the way that they wrote this in the book about coaching up, that she took a coaching stance, remembering that she was helping her principal learning as it went through. So yeah, very interesting.
Well, I'd love to know your thoughts on the 7 principles of adult learning, because, maybe it's because I teach high school now, but I see so many of these principles also applying to when we teach and work with our students.
Absolutely. And it's so many things that we need to tick off in our classrooms, exactly as you said. We have to feel safe to learn. We have to that we recognize that adults come with learning histories, that they've been in so many PD sessions where they tune out automatically because it's just another person telling them something that's not useful to them. So it's actually having to recognize how do we change that? How do we, when we stand up, and again, it comes back to some of the things that we've talked about already. It's building relationship, that they know that they can trust us. They can come to us and ask us those, questions that they're not going to dare ask someone else, that we can help them out with that. They need to know why we have to learn something. It's really stating that purpose. And again, it feels like I'm just talking about stuff we've already talked about, because earlier in the book, those conditions for learning is about purpose. Agency, we've spoken about agency, how important that is. Practicing internalizing learning. So again, that reflective process, taking what we've got and then reflecting on it, then thinking about how we're going to take that next step. I think we've all done that. We've listened to your podcast, Amy, and gone, oh, I'm going to try that idea. I'm going to put that into practice, and that's that. So it's thinking about how we can do that for our staff. And I guess my take from that is when I'm presenting a session, it's an action. So an example for the session that I ran with our curriculum leaders earlier in the week, I presented on our reading survey data that we have done. So we engaged in a national reading survey over here in Australia, very cool research. I will put the link in the show notes. I'll send it to Amy so she can do that. It's called the Deakin Teen Reading Survey. And that we participated in. So now I have pulled out our own school data, compared that with the preliminary national results, and then presented that to our curriculum leaders, which, I've got science teachers in there. This is about reading for pleasure. So I've got maths teachers and HPE teachers, or the heads of those areas anyway, and talking to them about this research, and then saying, okay, if you're not the English teacher, don't switch off. And they're an incredible bunch of educators, so none of them were, they all get it. But here are the next steps. Here's what I want you to do with this, or that I'm asking you to engage with me on in this journey. Here's what I'm trying to do in terms of building a reading culture. Here's the data. Here's where we're at. Here's where we could take some next steps, and giving them some practical applications for how you can do that. Because I think sometimes we, show that information, or we show the knowledge without showing the action point. Where can we put it into place?
Madison Dearnaley, I could do this all day. I am so sorry that we don't get to work in the same school together. I swear it would just be so much fun. I'm so grateful for any opportunity you and I have to chat and catch up. And I know someday we will be in the same room. It'll happen. It's going to happen. I'm a patient person. But Madison, we're going to include some fantastic links to your blog, give some instructions as to how our listeners can receive your newsletter, because I love me a teacher librarian newsletter. But would you let listeners know, because you and I have been on social media together it's been more than 5 years. I know it has. Would you let listeners know what is your preferred platform for when it comes to sharing what you do in your library space?
Absolutely. So you will find me, I have a website, so madisonslibrary.com. And from there, you've got all the links as well as the sign up for the newsletter. So that's probably the easiest place to find me. I am mostly on Instagram these days at Madisons_library. Of course, I'm also on Facebook, Madison's Library, Twitter, Madison's Library, although, X, I don't know. I still, and, Amy, you and I connect still there, and there's still some incredible people sharing there. So I pop in and out, but don't post. You'll find me on Threads at Madison's Library. Blue Sky's the new one. We'll try that and see. That's everything's Madison's Library. You'll find me on all of those places at various times.
Fantastic. Listen, I hope you have a wonderful summer. I know that you have a beautiful day. We've been able to hear some of the birds outside your window. And I got to tell you, I'm looking out and all I see is snow. Madison, I am grateful as always to have this opportunity to connect with you. Thank you so much for all you do and all that you share.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you for sharing this book and giving me the opportunity to chat to you about it. And thank you for sharing so many incredible PD opportunities through this amazing podcast. So thank you.
If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider joining us for our next book club episode when we read Jared Amato's upcoming book, Just Read It. The link is in today's show notes. A couple friendly reminders, friends. Use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more, and librarians who book their very first Literati Book Fair and mention the code UNITED when booking may qualify to receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. Visit the link in today's show notes and call the Literati team to see if you qualify. If you are attending ISTE 24 this summer in Denver, you don't want to miss the School Library Playground. Consider submitting a proposal to showcase your ideas no later than March 1st. Visit the link in today's show notes. I really hope you will consider sending in a voice message with purchases you regret for our next call-in episode. Visit the link in today's show notes. The topic of our next episode will be inclusive programming and my conversation with Rachel Grover and Stacy Gilbert. I hope you will tune in.